should we start with like an introduction on who you are?
I'm Siguza. I'm a security researcher from Switzerland. I specialize in iOS kernel hacking, basically. And I've been doing that since late 2016. Yeah, I've contributed to various jailbreaks, sometimes in more active roles, sometimes I just wrote the kernel exploit, published it, and then someone else turned it into a full jailbreak. And I maintain some tooling and like some resources. For example, I have a GitHub repo called iOS resources, which is just a list of exploit write-ups, links to various ARM manuals, a small ARM64 assembly crash course that I wrote, things like that. I also have a blog on which I haven't written anything in over 4 years now, which is something I really need to change.
Yeah.
I think that's as far as that goes. And you said I'm kind of famous in the community. I don't know how true that is, but okay, I guess I can say within a small bubble, I'm probably somewhat famous. But as soon as you step outside of that bubble, nobody knows who I am.
Yeah, it's really central to like the iOS reverse engineering community, I suppose.
Yeah.
But you were talking about jailbreaks, and as much as I know about it, which is this much, my viewers, I don't think they know really what it is. Could you explain exactly what a jailbreak does?
Oh my God, have we reached this point where like, in very simple terms, a jailbreak, at least on iOS, allows you to install things that Apple wouldn't allow you to install. And traditional, like originally, this was something like a package manager. On iPhone OS 1, there was no App Store, but there was Cydia. And suddenly you could install like games and stuff. And yeah, other things include like a web server that you run locally or themes for your home screen. Tweaks are a big thing as far as jailbreaks go, to like modify the amount of icons you can have in your dock, things like that.
So it was more on a customization purpose at first?
Yeah, I think that's the customization purpose is first and foremost.
Okay.
In general, I'd say it's just being able to do anything on your device that the hardware physically allows. And so this is technically just a pocket computer. And there's no reason why you couldn't, for example, run a virtual machine on this, other than Apple having a financial incentive to not allow it. And like back in the days of, I don't know, iOS 4, 5, 6, for example, there was no control center, but there was a tweak called SB settings where you'd swipe along your status bar and the thing would drop down and you could toggle like Wi-Fi on and off, Bluetooth on and off. And then in iOS 7, they introduced the control center, which was the same thing, but like less customizable.
So it really then came out for a customizable sense. But then I assume that people who would steal phones could also use the jailbreak to reset it and bypass Apple security. Was that possible as well?
Yeah, I suppose, like to a certain extent, because first off, iCloud lock wasn't a thing until like, when was it introduced? Like iOS 6, iOS 7, somewhere around there. Before that, that just wasn't a thing. And the way that works is just that Apple servers have a list where like a device ID is linked to an Apple ID or not if the device is not logged. And there's a subreddit called setup.app, because for a very long time, all you had to do to get to the home screen, you couldn't normally get through activation. But if you just renamed setup.app to something else, then you would just be dropped to the home screen and you could technically use the device, but you couldn't sign into an Apple ID. And so like you couldn't download any apps. Even today, so Apple has done a lot. Like the root file system is now read-only, and like there's a whole Merkle tree integrity check and everything, so that if you modify, the bootloader will already panic. So you can no longer just rename that. And also, I think even before that, they changed it so that if you renamed it, like the phone just wouldn't accept any touch input. And so they made this entire process a lot harder. But even then, if you're in a position where you have the bootloader compromised, like you could boot Android on the phone and then you could technically use it. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you can't really use it as an iPhone. But I think most like thieves wouldn't even bother with that. They will probably either just try to sell the phone to an unsuspecting victim who then can't use it, or they would scrap it for parts.
Yeah, I always had this feeling that I guess I was told this when I was much younger, and when you're young and you don't know anything about tech, but maybe that was not your your world, but put yourself in my situation. I didn't know much, and so I was told that they would steal your phone and bring it to one of these shops, and they had like a 0-day exploit and just unlocked your phone, reset it, and then sold it. And like for the longest time, I believed that.
I mean, it really depends on the time frame that you're talking about here, because between iOS 9.2 and 9.3, the scene around 0 days just changed dramatically. Because up to and including iOS 9.2, jailbreaks would usually chain multiple 0 days together. And this could start off with something like a path traversal from a restored backup, and then overwriting a file somewhere outside the locations that you were supposed to be able to write to. And then, yeah, maybe you would just... No, I actually don't think you could overwrite the binary because the root file system was still mounted as a read-only. But you could drop a binary somewhere that would then be invoked. And then you had like a malformed executable that had like overlapping segments, so that the code signing verification that was triggered at fault in time wouldn't actually be triggered. And you had like, I don't know, maybe 5 vulnerabilities before you even got to running any code on the device, and then stage a kernel exploit from there. And with iOS 9.3, this all changed. And also, all these vulnerabilities were dropped as 0 days. And with 9.3, the vulnerability was something that I believe Project Zero had killed. And then Pangu, a Chinese team, wrote a kernel exploit based on that. It was one single bug. It was a 1 day. And it was just an app that you'd install via Xcode. From then on out, that was the way it was done for years.
So when was this? iOS 9 was in...
So I had been somewhat interested in jailbreaks before then. And I still have my iPhone 5S on iOS 8.4, the TaiG jailbreak installed that I was using at the time. And in 2016, I got a new phone, the iPhone SE first generation.
Yeah.
And that came on iOS 9.3.3, which was just the last version that you could install this jailbreak on. And yeah, that's what I worked with.
So, but that was not the boot ROM exploit, was it? Or
no,
okay,
that was just a kernel exploit.
Oh, the kernel exploit, yeah. Because I did a bit of research on some of the jailbreaks that you worked on, and I saw something about a boot ROM exploit, and I did a bit more research on it, and I found out that you could actually use that exploit on the iPads until not that long ago, right?
This iPad right here is running iPadOS 18, and it's vulnerable. It's the last one.
Right, okay. How many iPhone devices, iOS devices do you have in front of you right now? Just like...
On my desk.
Yeah, on your desk. How many iOS?
I wondered whether you were going to ask.
Well,
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
No way.
11 devices on my desk.
Could we do something just for the thumbnail if you can hold them all in your hands?
I'm having trouble holding more than these.
Do you use those all the time?
Well, define use and all the time.
Okay, how much of those are you still hacking today?
So this one is, well, depending on how you look at it. So this one is, oh, I lied. It was actually 12 devices. One was under the iPad. Okay, my desk is a bit messy. So this is the one with the oldest chip inside of it. This one I'm not using for zero-day research. This is just for checkring compatibility maintenance. And then the other devices, like one is my personal phone, but the entire rest is like, so this is an A12 iPhone XR, and this one is still relevant as far as 0 days go. And then this is an A13, A14, A15, A16, A17, and A18. And so that's just all currently supported iPhone models.
Oh, okay.
Or like one model from each chip generation.
Mm-hmm. The last jailbreak on the iPhone is quite a while back, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which version was the last affected?
Is it like 16.4? I'm not even sure at this point. So the last version is 16.5 with the dopamine jailbreak. And there's also Troll Store, which is something less powerful than a jailbreak, but it allows you to install like unsigned apps, essentially. And I think that exists for iOS 17.0 now.
How do you install that on your device?
I have never I have never installed any of the recent jailbreaks, actually.
Oh, okay.
I've just been working with like 0 days in private. That I would just install it through Xcode or like iDevice installer. So, I mean, the way that this works is that iOS has a thing called Lockdown D, which is the daemon that handles exposing arbitrary services over USB. Mm-hmm. And this is used by iTunes or later Finder for synchronizing, like backing up, etc. This is also used by Xcode to install apps. And I don't know if you know libiMobile but it's essentially an open source re-implementation of that.
Okay.
To just work with all the protocols. And iDevice installer is just one of the front ends. And if you actually want to install an app and have it work on your device, you need to get what's called a provisioning profile, which is just a signed blob from Apple that says like, hey, this device ID and like for this device ID, this Apple ID can sign applications until this day. And then you need to bundle that into your app and sign it with your app, with a private key from your Apple ID. And then you just get a zip file that you can pass to iDevice installer. Yeah.
But that's a lot of stuff to learn and to know. How did you know all of this stuff? Because didn't you say on your blog that you started learning at the age of 9 or 11? No, 11. It was 11, right?
Programming in general, yeah. I was still in elementary school.
Yeah, that's what I was telling myself when I was going through this. I was like, I was playing The Sims at 11 and World of Warcraft actually a lot. Just like, I would never have been able to program, not because I was not smart enough, but I didn't even know what programming was. And no one around me was a programmer. No one at my school, no one in my family. Like, how did you pick that up?
I guess my dad was... Well, my dad isn't a programmer, but he has some programming knowledge. Like back when he was at university, computer science was not something that you could study, but they were working like with big mainframes at the time. But he did take... He said he took as many computer-related courses as you could. And I don't know if the name Niklaus Wirth means anything to you.
No, I don't know.
Well, do you know the Pascal language?
The Pascal language, is that like
a programming language?
Pre-C, after binary?
Yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, no, then no. I think the lowest one I know is C.
Okay. But yeah, Niklaus Wirth, he designed Pascal and a bunch of other programming languages. And yeah, my dad had him as a professor in some courses. I mean, he told me stories where he had his programs like on punch cards that you had to carry across the room.
What? And you would put in a machine and then it would read the little holes in the card and interpret it as code?
Yeah.
Oh my god, that's worse than having your exam on a sheet of paper in programming.
Yeah, he was like, if this falls out of your hand, like you can sit there and manually sort the cards for 2 hours.
Oh my gosh.
When I got into this, well, internet was already a thing because I was learning with online tutorials.
Oh.
It was still the days of like HTML4. And yeah, I mean, HTML is really, really simple. You do open bracket, B, close bracket, you write something and then it's bold. And with the first two things I learned were HTML and PHP. And today I see PHP as something horrible that should never be used in production. But for learning, I think it's actually quite decent, just because you can write 2 lines of code and you start seeing results. And especially as a kid, I'm pretty sure that like quick feedback was required to keep me going. But yeah, at the time, I mean, I was obviously also playing games, and I guess part of it was wanting to know how to make games. And I don't know if browser games, do you know what browser games are?
No, Club Penguin, is that a browser game?
Those were Flash games.
Oh, Flash.
Which is slightly different. No, browser games are like older and more crude, where it's literally just text on a website. And like you may have little icons and stats where it's like, oh, you have this much food, this much wood, etc. And then you send your character like to cut down wood. And then it just says like 30 minutes until he's back.
Okay.
But you don't see anything. There's like, it's just text essentially.
Yeah, I
was like, sure, I can make this. And so, yeah, this was something that I wanted to make my own browser game at some point. That like none of this code still exists today, but I mean the code will probably still run because these things are backwards compatible, like to no end. But I mean, browsers have actually gotten more lenient with like accepting invalid HTML, I want to say, because almost every website is garbage. And no, but you know, things like you open a div tag and you never close it. It's just so. I think I read this in a blog post that like browsers usually have 2 modes. One is strict validation, and that's pretty much only applied to XHTML. And then it's like really strict, and like every attribute must be in its place, etc. And the other is just tag soup. And it's just, you try whatever, like it's just best effort, you know.
You were mentioning earlier that PHP should never be in existence. Why is that? What's your beef with PHP?
So to anyone like listening to the podcast, you can go on phpsadness.com and get a long list of gripes with PHP, but in short, PHP makes it really easy to shoot yourself in the foot. And I think scripts that are like 100 lines are probably fine. But as soon as you start, like, just a few examples, like for the longest time, if you had a string that happened to be a valid numerical literal, and you compare two strings with the double equal sign, if they both happen to be like of the for example, if you have a SHA-1 hash or a SHA-256 hash of a password, and it starts with 0E and then just numbers. Well, that's 0 to the 10th power, to the power of this. So it gets cast to 0, even though it's a string.
Oh, the whole
and like
string.
This is, yeah, because it's a valid numerical literal. And this is used in CTFs all the time.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just things like that. Or I also think PHP is mismanaged. There's like the Mersenne twister algorithm for seeded randomness. And at some point, someone realized that PHP had actually implemented it wrong. So they corrected it. But now all the old scripts were no longer generating the same randomness.
Oh.
And it's like, you just broke compatibility, man. You don't do that.
Okay, so I see what you mean by mismanaged then. Yeah.
And also, just in general, like the architecture, I guess, of CGI scripts in general, where the entire idea is like, you get one HTTP request, and then so you parse all the PHP files, you load them all, you establish a database connection, you fetch a record, etc., and then you display this, and then you close the database connection again. This is like so much overhead for every single request. And again, if you're writing something small, then it probably doesn't matter. If you're writing a website that wants to handle tens of thousands or millions of requests a second, then I just think PHP doesn't scale well.
Do you work on a lot of browser exploits as well, or do you mostly focus on iOS?
No. No. So I've done some. I mean, I've never actually hacked browsers. I've done post exploitation once, where I and a couple of friends worked on a jailbreak me for iOS 10, where you just go on a website and you'd slide to jailbreak.
I saw that. That was so cool. It was like a warning for flashing lights, and then it was just a slide. Yeah. I saw that. That was really cool. I was like, what the heck is this? And I didn't understand that was directly like the jailbreak.
It's totally not spyware, trust me, bro.
But so that was a browser exploit then, or that was for a jailbreak then?
So there's obviously browser exploit involved in that, but I didn't find the bug and I didn't write the exploit. That was just something that was published on GitHub. And yeah, so that gave us the adder-off and fake-opt primitives. And then what we did was load a binary onto the JIT region and like invoke the dynamic linker on it to set it up and everything. And then from there, stage a kernel exploit, get kernel read write, and then use that to install, like unsandbox ourselves, give ourselves root permissions, and then, standard procedure, remount the root file system as writable, install the jailbreak packages and everything.
How do you find these people to work with?
So in my case, I mean, from the material I published, and then they hit me up on Discord, on Twitter, wherever.
Okay. So they reach out to you.
Yeah.
But that's because you've published a lot, but I guess before that, your first like jailbreak, how did you join the team?
So that's the first entry on my blog. which is Clover. There was, so the NSO group and their Pegasus spyware. Yes. So iOS, what was it? I think iOS 9.3.5 was the one where Apple, for the first time, patched vulnerabilities that were used by a version of Pegasus that was caught in the wild. And so these vulnerabilities worked up to and including iOS 9.3.4. And I think also some early versions of iOS 10, maybe. And the thing is, the jailbreak I was using at the time, the Pangu one, didn't export what's known as task for PID 0, which is just it was just a standard way of exposing kernel read-write primitives to userland. And so I was like, I want to poke kernel memory, but this jailbreak doesn't do it. And then there was another security researcher, Indoc, where I basically explained this entire story in the first blog post that I ever did.
Oh, okay.
He exploited it on macOS, but what was crucial for him was that he could use a 32-bit binary and map page 0. And that's not something I could do on iOS. And also, obviously, back then the Macs were all Intel Macs, and so none of the Rob chain or whatever would work. And I just set out to write a kernel exploit based on those vulnerabilities. And I think it took me 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, something like that. And I just documented the entire process in my blog post. And then sometime in December, I posted a video to Twitter where I had Cydia installed on my phone, but if you weren't in jailbroken mode. So this is also something that has changed between iOS 9.2 and 9.3, because you went from fully untethered jailbreaks to what they call semi-untethered, where in a fully untethered jailbreak, the jailbreak just runs at boot and then installs whatever patches and hooks need to be in place. And with 9.3, you'd have an app that every time you rebooted your phone, you'd have to run the app again. And so I posted a video where I tapped on Cydia and it wouldn't open. Then I tapped on my Clover app, and then that ran something, dropped you back at the home screen. Then you tap on Cydia and then it opens. Or wait, no, that's not even the thing. No, I showed a mobile term. I showed a command line and the use of a command line tool.
Oh.
That tried to, I think, dump or I don't remember what exactly it was doing. I probably still have the video from somewhere, but it was using, it was doing something with kernel memory. And at first that wasn't working. Then I ran my exploit, and then it was working. And I posted that to Twitter. And then people started following me, and a few people messaged me. And there was also a point in time where 3 people in particular had messaged me and were also interested in getting started, or were getting started and just asking questions about exploitation, security in general. And I found myself pretty much sending the same messages to all 3 of them. And so I just created a group chat for the 4 of us.
But how old were you when that happened? Because 2016, you must have been still in high school then.
No.
Oh, you were
out of high school.
You were out of high school.
I was.
Oh, okay. So you were in university at that point. Were you studying programming, or did you do CS at uni?
Computer science, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay, yeah. It seems pretty obvious, but you could. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe there's something surprising there. I did philosophy, and I don't know.
No. So the thing is, I started at the ETH Zurich in 2015. And then in 2018, I dropped out because there were 2 courses in which I had failed the exam twice. And so for neither of these courses, I could take the exam again. And these two courses happened to be in a category where I think you needed, what was it, like 48 credits in total?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was something, or hold on. I don't know the exact number. I could look up the exact amount of credits you would have needed, but essentially you could only fail one course in the entire category. And if you failed two, then you could no longer reach the amount of credits required. And so I could no longer complete my bachelor's degree. And they would have allowed me to switch to a different subject like physics or math. But I was like, well, if it's not going to be computer science, then it's not going to be anything.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I ended up switching to a different university where I essentially had to redo everything. I got a bachelor's degree now.
Do you think it was worth it to have a bachelor's degree in computer science for your field?
No.
Because you do vulnerability research, so it's mostly practice at the end of the day, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know enough people who do vulnerability research and do it very well who don't have a degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most people I know in coding actually don't have a degree. Some of them don't even have a high school degree either, so yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I remember this one girl I studied with. She actually already had a bachelor's degree. I think it was an art degree, but something like graphic design, or I don't know the exact like title. But she started working at a small game studio and just realized that like she was the one with the bachelor's degree, but the programmers without the degree were making like 3 times as much as she was. And so she was like, this can't be it, man. And then she went back to uni and
studied CS.
Got a degree in computer sciences.
That's so cool. Yeah, exactly. Like most people I know don't have a degree. So I don't know. I think I don't have a degree either. No? I have a high school degree. I didn't study CS. I went to this coding school. Actually, they have one in Switzerland as well, but it's in Lausanne. It's called 42. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's like a coding school. But there's like no academic year, there's no teachers, it's project based. So people learn like just coding, like practical like coding, and you have to use Google and ask the people around you. It's peer to peer. So but it works pretty well, and like a lot of people I know have done that and are really good at what they do. So
yeah, so I think also the thing is also like a lot of the people that you hear from, like who engage in, I want to say, programming related topics on social media, for example, I think there's a strong selection bias there in that those are the people who can teach themselves, who are motivated to do stuff by themselves, who maybe contribute to open source projects, etc. And I think especially in vulnerability research, there was one moment in, I think it was last year at a conference in Barcelona where I don't even remember whether it was lunch or dinner, but we went to a restaurant with like a group of 8 people or so, and it was just I think it was 7 of us tech people and then one guy's girlfriend, and all we talked about was work stuff. And she was like, Jesus, do you guys ever talk about something else? And I was like, well, kind of no. That's like, there's selection bias. You only get here if this is what you do all day.
Yeah. True. I can't imagine you all going to dinner and then talking about I don't know, like a reality TV or something, you know? Like, that would be so absurd.
It's just like, oh, have you seen the new episode of Desperate Housewives?
Exactly. No, but
No,
you guys want to exchange your ideas, and it's interesting for you. It's not really work for you, though. It's more like, oh, this is so interesting. Like, I want to talk about this.
Yeah, that's true. So I do think that you probably need a degree if you want to get hired at like a Silicon Valley company. Or actually, I remember Google doing like, there's some course that they offer, which is like 6 months, and they regard this as equal to having a bachelor's degree, which I guess is just a way of saying that from a bachelor's degree, they only need these 6 months worth of training. But yeah.
So, going back to Apple maybe a bit, I have some questions on the new DMA regulations.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was wondering what was really your position on it, and also if you can steel man Apple's side, you know, if you can understand why they don't want to do this. What's your position on this?
So my position on this is that the DMA goes in, like, the DMA has had a positive effect, but not as much as I had hoped. Because essentially there's 3 parties involved. Or let's start somewhere else. 20 years ago, when you bought when you were setting up a computer, or like if you wanted a computer, you'd go out and buy the hardware. Then you'd go out and buy like an operating system to run on it. And then you'd go out and purchase applications to run on it. And each of those were individual transactions. And now we're in a place where you go out and buy the hardware. And then the operating system comes with it for free, and you get updates for free for a couple of years. And we've actually come to rely on that for security purposes. But then the operating system restricts what you can install and who you have to pay money to if you want to install anything. And that really meddles the lines, or changes the power dynamics. And so the 3 parties involved in this are the vendor, like the first party, which is Apple in this case. Then there's developers. What is Discord doing with the thumbs up?
It's the Apple thing.
Is it?
It's like if you do this, because you're using a MacBook right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's Apple. It's Apple. I don't know what else to say. Maybe you can find an exploit in this. I don't know. Anyway.
No, but the 3 parties involved, like, you have the actual vendor of the device and operating system, in this case Apple. You have the third-party developers, and then you have the users. And before the DMA, all the power was just in Apple's hands. The DMA seeks to strike a balance between Apple and third-party developers. But what I would have wished for was a consumer protection or a consumer rights law that placed more of the power in users' hands. Or like, Apple Silicon Macs are, from a hardware perspective, very, very similar to Apple's mobile devices. They just have an unlocked bootloader where you can install Linux on. And that drastically shifts the power dynamics. Like, on macOS, you don't pay a 30% tax to Apple. And if Apple tried to make that happen, then people would start patching the operating system, or like someone would write a solution that would be a one-click thing. You'd still have to boot into recovery and like run a script from the web or something, but I'm convinced that people would start doing this. And so, yeah, essentially what I would wish for is something like an unlocked bootloader. But the DMA does already force Apple to actually have to compete in a whole lot of areas. And we've gotten things like emulators on the App Store now, which was unthinkable a year ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what about like the alternative stores, like the alternative marketplace? Do you think that that could cause a lot more security vulnerabilities on how user install applications?
No, because see, that's a thing that Apple has been saying time and time again, and that's an outright lie. Because for one, so their claim is that the app review on the App Store is integral to the security of their devices. And that is not true. And first off, the app review is actually terrible. And there's one person in particular, I think his name is Costa Eleftherio, who, I don't know if he still do this, but at least for a while, he would just every single day post to Twitter some app he found on the App Store that was violating the rules, scamming users, etc. There are certain apps that are like very thinly veiled casino fronts, or like various apps that just like that give you a pop-up where they want you to rate the app, or like they can invoke a pop-up that is not hosted within the app, but they can overlay things so that the 5-star rating and the submit button, or I think Apple fixed this at some point, but at least for a while it was possible that they'd give you a pop-up and be like, hey, rate the app. Mm-hmm. And all you were allowed to tap were the 5-star and the submit. And otherwise it wouldn't let you close the app. It wouldn't allow you to cancel or anything. I suppose you could reboot the phone, but it's just things like these. Yeah. Or there was actually one time where Jailbreak has made it onto the App Store.
What?
Yeah,
Which one?
This was, I think it was, so there's a Chinese piracy website called 25pp. I don't know if it still exists today, but back in the day, it actually provided the funding for some jailbreaks. And then there would be 2 versions of the jailbreak. One that was released by the team, and then another app where the jailbreak was like, it incorporated the exploit and everything, but it also had like their jailbroke, like their piracy app store and whatnot. And that was usually just called PP jailbreak. There's a Reddit post where someone links to this and everything. And I sent this link to someone a couple months ago. Mm-hmm. Let me see if I can find it. Okay, no, I can't find it because Google has become useless as far as Reddit is concerned.
Well, it's okay. It's okay, but it's so.
No, wait! I found it. Ooh. I can send you a link. Release PP jailbreak on the App Store. And it was gone pretty quickly. I don't know how many users were able to install this, but it was quite a bunch. And so it's just just a full-blown jailbreak. Yeah. And some of these tactics are that they use to get through app review. It's literally just geofencing, or like checking if your IP address is 17 point something.
That's it.
And then it's like, oh, you do something harmless. Oh, you're like, oh, we're just a wallpaper app or something. And then outside of Apple, it's like, here's the casino, here's whatever. Mm-hmm. But so, yeah, my entire point is just that app review for one is trash, and for another is not not even relevant to the security of iOS, because that is baked into the operating system. And actually, something that rarely gets a mention, when people talk about sideloading and sideloading is going to allow this and that. Sideloading has been a thing for years.
Yeah.
It's just been exclusive to enterprises.
Oh.
Well,
what do you mean?
No. So there's three different, I want to say, certificates that allow you to install apps on your device. The first is a free certificate that you can get from Xcode. It's valid for 7 days.
Okay.
And then if you have a developer account that costs roughly $100 a year, you get a certificate with which you can install apps that stay on your device for an entire year. And you can use things like with the 7-day certificate, there's also certain things you can't use, such as like VPN features. With the paid certificate, you can do that. And then there's an enterprise certificate, which I think costs $300 a year, but you also need to have a registered company and you need to undergo some extended checks and everything. You get a certificate that you're legally only allowed to use for distribution within your company. But technically, these can be installed on any device. And there was a point in time a couple of years ago when both Facebook and Google were caught using these certificates to have people outside the company install their apps. And was it called Onavo? Facebook will shut down its spyware VPN app Onavo.
Oh.
Yeah, so essentially I don't know exactly what Google was doing, but what Facebook was doing, among other things, like obviously all the company internal apps would also use this certificate. But something that they were doing was have people install a VPN app that would then just sniff all the traffic and analyze it and just give all the data to Facebook.
What?
And so this was in 2019. And so like the infrastructure has been in place all this time. I mean, the DMA requires some specific things for which Apple had to change or like add certain things. But just general sideloading has been a thing for years. And so if there was to be any security, it would have to be baked into the operating system. And that's exactly how it is.
Yeah.
If you could do a jailbreak just by having an enterprise certificate, dude, so many people would have an enterprise certificate.
Yeah, but so you would say that there's no real security risks with the alternative store that doesn't already exist on the Apple Store, on the official Apple Store. Yeah. I know some people who've downloaded some malicious applications directly from the Apple Store and got their accounts stolen. So,
I mean, the thing is, you don't even need to download an app for that. You can just be tricked into
like
giving
phishing?
your Apple ID, and like a website will suffice. Legitimate Apple.info.
Apple.info.
No. Legitimate Apple.info.
Is that a website?
It's something I made up.
Oh.
If I send you to like
Yeah.
worldwide Apple support.
You mean the domain name? Yeah, I see.
Yeah.
I was zoned out there for a second. Yeah. So we were talking about earlier, how you were saying in the old days you would buy your hardware and then your OS and you would have full control on it. And today, like everything comes shipped together, but you have some restrictions on it. Would you be more interested, or are you maybe already doing it? Are you using open source OSs like Linux? distributions, or is that not interesting for you right now?
I mean, interesting.
I don't know. Do you not like it? Do you have opinions about open source OS? Do you think it's maybe less secure, or why are you not using Linux if you don't like the fact that Apple kind of like controls you?
So, I mean, first and foremost, I want my devices to work. And Asahi Linux has been making progress. Like, they have been making some good progress as far as Apple Silicon hardware goes.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually not sure where I'm going. So currently I'm using macOS on my laptop, my desktop.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually not sure how that's going to look like in 5 years. Just because, so one thing that I will say is I never want to use Windows if I can avoid it. And I also don't want to install Windows on bare metal. I will install it in a VM if I need it for something. But it's just,
Is it security
no.
wise? Like, do you think there are more security risks on Windows than Apple?
Both security and just usability wise.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You get advertisement in the operating system. Like, give me a fucking break, man.
True, that's true. I have seen that actually.
And so the security of Windows, I'm not super familiar with, but as far as I can see, most security issues are not like programming mistakes, but I want to say design mistakes, where a system was designed a certain way, and now 100,001 enterprises depend on this continuing to work this way, and so Microsoft can never change it.
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually a talk by, I think, Microsoft's head of security on the security of the Xbox One. And like, it's not that Microsoft doesn't understand how security works. I think it's just that they're so locked into all the enterprise support that they have to provide that they can never actually do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's as far as my opinion on Windows goes.
Yeah.
And on Linux, it's like, so I think macOS has been getting worse since, I want to say 10.13, maybe 10.14, somewhere around there, where it's like, I'm seeing more and more UI bugs, more and more regressions in like, there's certain edge cases. For example, I'm using a Swiss German keyboard layout, but my operating system is in English. And I don't know if that's the reason for it, but the preview app, like the PDF viewer, the commands to zoom in and zoom out. Zooming out is command minus, which works. Zooming in should be command plus, but that doesn't work. I think it's like command exclamation mark. And that used to not be the case a couple of years ago, but at some point there was some change and it's been broken ever since.
That's so odd.
And the only reason I can imagine for this is that on a Swiss German keyboard, the plus is like shift 1. And I think on a German keyboard, in the same location, like if you press shift 1, you get an exclamation mark. And I don't know why. I haven't even looked into it. I reported it, I think 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, but it's just not up on their priority list. And it's just, it's things like that where I feel like I'm the only person who ever runs into this. Or like, I have an alphanumeric passcode on my, so I'm using an iPhone with a home button, and I'm using an alphanumeric passcode on it. What do you think? How many people worldwide are there who fit this combination? And so the thing is, so this was actually fixed in iOS 18 now, but in iOS 15, when you first booted up the phone, and like it would show you the password field and everything, but it didn't give you a keyboard. But then if you tapped into the field, it would bring up the keyboard. And then in iOS 16, this was made even worse, where even tapping into the field wouldn't work. You had to put the display to sleep and like just tap the side button twice, and then you'd get a keyboard.
Broken.
And yeah, on macOS, I have like at least 15 things that I written down in the Notes app that I still need to file proper bug reports for. But it's just, yeah, it's more and more things breaking. And like some of those have workarounds. Sometimes I'm like, currently I haven't upgraded to macOS 15 yet, just because, you know, VPN apps and like network filters, etc., are said to be entirely broken. And so I'm gonna wait for like 15.1, maybe 15.2. And also, Apple has been tightening their grip on macOS with code signing, because they still want you to notarize every single app. And for one, that requires a paid developer account. And if you don't have like a corporation registered, it also requires doxing yourself, because then your whole name will just be embedded in the code signature of the app. But more importantly, it also allows you to enforce certain terms. And, you know, I maintain the Checkra jailbreak. We have a macOS app. And according to my reading of the developer terms of service, I'm not allowed to notarize that, because it bundles an exploit for iOS. And Apple is like, oh, you're interfering with the security of our device. I'm like, bro, I do what the user wants, and you don't. But
yeah,
if anyone out there wants to try notarizing the Checkra app, be my guest.
Yeah.
Just don't hold me liable for any action Apple takes against you.
Disclaimer. Yeah, is that legal actually then, all of this? Has Apple ever tried to sue someone who's created a jailbreak? How does this usually go?
So to the best of my knowledge, Apple has never sued anyone who created a jailbreak. They have sued the NSO group, but I think they recently just dropped the lawsuit because. So I'm not sure whether it was because of that, but it was after the revelation that like the Israeli government confiscated a whole lot of material that courts in the US tried to obtain. But yeah, as far as jailbreaks go, I think Apple has never sued anyone. I know Sony has sued people, and I think Nintendo went a lot further to like hire private investigators to like, I don't know, find dirt on the people who released anything. Like, but yeah, Nintendo also issues DMCA takedowns for like let's plays of their games. So Nintendo is a whole different. Nintendo hates everyone.
Yeah. Also, PlayStation. I think there was what was this guy's name? I forget. It's the one who has comma AI. Oh yeah, that one. GeoHot. Yeah, he hacked the PlayStation, and didn't they sue him, or he got in trouble?
And then he made a diss track.
He made a diss track? I have to find that. I'll put that in the podcast. I have some more questions about Apple, if that's okay. Do you...
Actually, hold on.
Mhm.
Actually, the most I've ever gotten was a DMCA takedown, but that wasn't even actually issued by Apple. It was Apple by their law. It was issued by their law firm, and then a couple hours later, it was retracted because, yeah, apparently. So yeah, the thing I just posted a decryption key for one CepOS firmware for an A12 device to Twitter, and then I got a DMCA takedown for that. And then a couple hours later, it was retracted.
How did they find you? Because you don't share your name, right? Usually people call you Siguza, even your colleagues.
No, I mean, they sent the DMCA takedown to Twitter.
Oh, to Twitter.
Like, hey, like,
okay,
your tweet is no longer available because of a claim by Kilpatrick Townsend.
Oh my, okay. But then they retracted it, so your tweet was back then.
Yeah.
Okay, that's funny. Do you know why it was retracted?
Well, because someone at Apple reached out to Kilpatrick Townsend and was like, no. It's just about the general legal practice, or like, I mean, the decryption key is randomness, and there's a whole Wikipedia article on like illegal numbers, etc. But yeah, I think this is just a can of worms that Apple's lawyers are not willing to open.
Okay. How did you find that decryption key? Did they just leak it?
No.
Oh. It was through your digging. I see. Yeah. That I actually had a question about that. That I know that well, you must have or some like access to betas and stuff like that. People who work in the VR world sometimes have access to that, right? So does Apple sometimes mess up and leak sensitive information in their betas? Have you seen a lot of that?
Well, not just betas, just like oh my god.
What's the worst thing that you've seen there as that they leaked?
The worst thing. That's a good question. So I mean, hold on. First, you asked whether I have access to betas. Like everything, everyone can get access to betas. This is not like, well, there's the public beta and then there's the developer beta, but usually it's like the links to the firmwares are just on the public CDN, and you can usually just go on the Apple wiki, and the links are all there for you to download. What's the worst thing that they've... So, the thing is, I actually have a NAS sitting down here, which has about 90 terabytes worth of Apple firmwares archived.
Terabytes?
90 terabytes.
Okay.
And yeah, last night I ordered a couple more hard drives and an expansion unit for my NAS.
Oh my gosh. Yep.
Yeah, so what's the worst thing that they've leaked? So as far as I'm aware, before iOS 12, they never really leaked anything. Oh, no, I mean, I guess there have been a couple of leaks. There have been times where like certain Delta OTA, like, okay, so over the air updates the way you update your iPhone today, just in the settings app. There's deltas for these, so that you don't have to download like a full 6 gigabytes or whatever. And before iOS 10, there only used to be deltas. And there was also a weird thing where like there wasn't just the release and the betas, but there were also carrier updates, which I suppose they pushed out to like their like mobile carrier partners ahead of time. And I remember for the iPhone 5S, there were some of these Delta updates were available before the 5S was even out. And so for Apple, this was probably one of the worst leaks, just because they try and keep their secrecy and everything. But yeah, most other things are like, so in iOS 12, I mean, the iOS kernels have their symbols stripped usually. And there have been a whole bunch of times where they shipped kernels that were symbolicated, which is nice for research. There have been times where they accidentally shipped development bootloaders, and like you couldn't flash them. But again, it was nice for reversing. They have shipped like I remember one instance in the kernel debug kit where like Apple publishes the source code for like the actual kernel. Pretty much all the kernel extensions at this point are closed source, but the core kernel is still open source, and you're supposed to be able to build it. But because of some private ISA stuff that Apple has added to their hardware, which I've been told they're not allowed to document. So what they have to do is also provide you with a static library that has like custom instructions inside it and everything. And I think the first time they shipped this, or no, it actually used to be in the source tree the first time that they released this. And I think they accidentally shipped bitcode instead of like ARM64 opcodes. And yeah, like, okay, this allowed greater reconstruction of the internal stuff, and I guess gave us, I don't know if it gave us register names. I think it gave us some instruction names at least. Not really relevant to security, I suppose, but just knowing how the hardware works. What else have they leaked?
Well, they've leaked a lot of stuff. I assume they leaked a lot of symbols as well, which helped with reverse engineering.
Yeah. I mean, not to the extent that you might think, because macOS is symbolicated, and like there's a couple different kernel extensions, but for the most part, it's the same source tree. And so you can usually just use macOS to cross-reference an iOS kernel and symbolicate pretty much everything. But yeah, I don't think they've ever leaked anything that would have allowed you to like install something on your device.
Yeah.
But they've definitely leaked things that made reverse engineering easier, or like also just curious. I mean, okay, so something that they've repeatedly leaked in a whole bunch of ways was just things about upcoming devices, upcoming features, etc. For example, one version of LD64, the linker that they used up to like 2 years ago or so, had references to an reality OS. So in some places it was called XR OS, in other places it was called reality OS. the official name is Vision OS, but I'm assuming that the teams didn't even know this. They were just working with a code name. And yeah, sometimes information about upcoming iPhone models, etc. Again, something Apple PR cares a lot about, but researchers usually don't. Unless it's like a certain security feature.
You mentioned earlier that the kernel like GNU was open source. I think some other components as well. But do you think that if Apple made their bootloader, for example, open source, would that give you like a competitive edge in VR and vulnerability researching? Like if other people had access to the bootloader?
So the thing is, the bootloader source code actually leaked a couple of years ago. And of course, that was just like one point in time. It was of something between. So I'm going off of ROM versions here, but it was something between the A9X and the A10 chip. So it was probably sometime in 2015 where the source was captured, and then it was a couple of years before it was leaked. And I don't think this even had too much of an impact.
No.
Because so the vulnerability that is used in Checkmate, which is Checkmate, this was actually found via patch diffing.
Oh.
Because apparently Apple had found this internally and then patched it in iBoot, but it was also present in the ROM, and then But yeah, no, I don't believe in security through obscurity.
Yeah.
And actually, so the interesting thing is, historically, Apple has always encrypted their bootloaders and also the step firmware, which is why there was a key to post in the first place. For 32-bit, they stopped encrypting the bootloaders in iOS 10. And I don't know whether this was actually intentional or not, but for 64-bit, they kept it for a long time. This was actually also something that was in a leak. I don't remember. I think it was an early version, like a beta of macOS 11, where for 2 or 3 versions, they just didn't encrypt the bootloaders and the set firmware. It's just entirely unencrypted.
Okay.
And yeah, then in some iOS 18.0 beta, they also stopped encrypting the bootloaders. And they even did, I don't know whether it was a press release, but they released a bit of information somewhere that said, based our commitment to transparency, blah blah blah. It was related to private cloud compute, and that you're like supposed to be able to like actually verify essentially the entire thing. And so iBoot is no longer encrypted now. You don't get access to the ROM, at least not from Apple. There's usually ROM images floating around on the internet, but
somewhere. Yeah. Okay, so you wouldn't say that you would lose a competitive edge then if like the entirety of Apple software and OS went open source then?
So I mean, it's I guess you have to separate them into attack surfaces that are available by default and ones that aren't. I think there's a lot of kernel extensions that probably no one has ever looked at just because they've never been in a position where they had access to the APIs that it exposed. And so there was never a reason to look at those. If you get access to one of those, then there can probably be a lot of low-hanging fruits. But the ones that are available from like the default sandbox, I don't think it would make a big difference if those were open sourced security buys, because they've been hit so hard over the years anyway. And I think the same is true for the bootloader. With the others, with the kernel extensions that haven't been thoroughly audited, okay, maybe you could find a vulnerability in there, but you probably still can't reach it.